Love Stories from the Raj. Edited by Pran Nevile. Read by Suyash Mohan. Introduction. For the early British settlers in India, life was a dreary existence. The heat and the dust of the country, the tyranny of solitude, and the dearth of means of recreation added to their miseries. Perhaps what they missed most was feminine company. The few European women who had accompanied their fortune-hunting husbands restricted their social intercourse to a small select circle of friends. Access to the native gentry was almost impossible until a much later period when they came to learn and even respect and admire Indian manners and customs. With racial prejudice yet to make its ugly appearance, the men mixed freely with Indians on equal terms. Some 18th century sketches and drawings depict Englishmen dressed in Indian clothing, lolling on cushions, smoking hookahs, and enjoying nautch parties. The East India Company at one time tried to copy the Portuguese practice of playing the matchmaker by shipping batches of young women for its bachelor employees, but the experiment failed. No wonder then that many a man fell into the arms of a native beauty. The burgeoning Raj was thus very much a masculine affair. The women were honored in their absence by the founders of the empire, who suffered prolonged separation from their wives and families. To rephrase a hoary catchphrase, the empire was not acquired in a fit of absence of mind so much as in a fit of absence of wives. According to Ronald Hayham, a distinguished British historian, the enjoyment and exploitation of black flesh was as powerful an attraction as any desire to develop economic resources. In the exotic realms of Hindustan, some of the European traders and adventurers found outlets for their surplus emotional and sexual energies, which were somewhat suppressed in the more inhibited Britain. Deterred by the perils of a long and tortuous voyage, few British women ventured to come to India until the late 18th century. Between 1700 and 1818, no less than 160 sailing ships of the East India Company were lost, burnt, seized, or wrecked. Women from the captured ships were carried away by pirates and sold in the slave market at Surat, from where some of them landed in the harems of Indian rulers. The John Company employees who lacked moral or intellectual resources for a life of continence usually took Indian women as unofficial wives and mistresses. Until the end of the 18th century, few of them could afford to maintain a European wife. The cost of landing one at Calcutta worked out at rupees 5,000. Moreover, European wives expected to be provided with carriages, dressmakers, hairdressers, ladies' maids, and nannies, which ordinary company officials could ill afford. In these circumstances, keeping an Indian mistress provided not only a piece of sexual expediency, but also a very pleasant way of learning the language, customs, and manners of the country and its people. They were like sleeping dictionaries. Their upright, supple, and slender, well-rounded limbs and their smooth skin of a bright chestnut color, no doubt, turned many a British male head. Liaisons were easy to arrange. Captain Williamson, in his famous guidebook East India Vade Mecum 1810, observed that the practice of keeping Indian mistresses was an economic necessity. It would be wrong, he said, to conclude that these connections are made by choice to the neglect of our fair countrywomen. There was nothing shameful or secret about these relationships, and even the governor of Bombay and members of his council publicly admitted to having native mistresses. The practice was also defended on the ground that it improved knowledge of local affairs, and some senior officers even encouraged it openly. Garnet Wolseley, who was in India just after the mutiny, is said to have confessed to his brother that he consoled himself with a beautiful Eastern princess who answered all the purposes of a wife without giving any of the bother. He had no wish to be caught in European marriage by some bitch, unless an heiress. Samuel Brown, a company official, recorded in his journal that the native women were so amusingly playful, so anxious to please, that a person after being accustomed to their society shrinks from the idea of encountering the whims or yielding to the furies of an English woman. There was a colonel who even agreed to be circumcised in order to get possession of a Muslim woman who imposed this condition before becoming his mistress. For the greater part of the 18th century, the company's servants were merchants who had come to India to make a fortune. A favorite after-dinner toast of those days was "a lass and a lakh a day," a goal natural to men who saw a lakh of rupees a worthwhile object of ambition, and a bibi, an Indian mistress, a fitting companion. Many Englishmen happily settled down with these women and raised families, but left them behind when returning to England. The pathos of such a parting is expressed in a ballad sung by an Indian bibi. "'Tis thy will and I must leave thee. Of thou best beloved farewell. I forbear lest I should grieve thee. Half my heart felt pangs to tell. Soon a British fair will charm thee. Thou, alas, her smiles must woo. But though she to rapture warm thee, don't forget, poor Hindu." Children of these mixed unions, however, presented some problems. As they grew up, they carried with them the stigma of illegitimacy. They were known as half-castes, Indo-Britons, East Indians, and Eurasians, until finally in the early 20th century they were given the appellation Anglo-Indian, a nomenclature formerly applied to British men and women living in India. At different times, Anglo-Indians occupied a different status on the Indian social scene. Until about 1785, they were accepted on an equal footing with the British. Senior company officials sometimes sent their children for education to England. According to Anglo-Indian historians, 3 British Prime Ministers, the 2 Pitts and Lord Liverpool, are said to have some Indian blood. From the beginning of the 19th century till 1835, Anglo-Indians were excluded from the East India Company's services. Later on, however, they were provided jobs in certain services as Indians in the education and defence as British. They were mostly employed in railways, telegraphs and customs. The Indian caste system also affected the British attitude to Anglo-Indians, since the children of British fathers and native women were not accepted into their mothers' families. From 1800 onwards, British women started arriving in India in increasing numbers to shop in its marriage bazaar. In that era of large families in England, for girls without dowry and charm, the only prospect was spinsterhood. Men who had amassed fortunes in India by fair means or foul, the so-called nabobs, were much sought after by parents and guardians of marriageable daughters. Even as early as the time of Clive, girls just out from home had been known as the newly arrived angels, and there was keen competition to carry them ashore at Madras or to escort them from their carriages to the church at Calcutta. As the 19th century rolled on and the frequency of sailings by the company's Indiamen increased, the ships brought regular cargoes of venturesome beauties bent on matrimony. They grew into a social phenomenon known as the fishing fleet. With this influx of women, Edinburgh came to be called the flesh market for the Indian marriage mart. London sent supplies too. It was an age of quick marriages. Arrivals of young damsels, which were notified in the newspapers, were an exciting event for bachelors bidding their time for a wife. On such occasions, the captains of the ships and other well-known ladies of the settlement would organize grand parties where the candidates for wifehood sat up for 3 or 4 nights in succession, while the eligible bachelors, young and old, rushed there to try their luck. Matches were arranged on the spot while the ladies were on exhibition. The church on Sundays was also recognized as a marriage bazaar, where the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?